Have you ever wondered why you consume so many dystopian science fiction stories? It's probably because we're living in a real-life dystopia right now. Hi, I'm Essie. I'm an autistic and ADHD therapist, and today I want to talk to you about the incredible parallels between elements we see in dystopian science fiction stories and in real-life oppression as it occurs today for people who are neurodivergent. But first, I want to start by reading an excerpt from my book, Neurodivergent Game Plan. This is a fictional story that I start the book with, and it draws these parallels very clearly and provides an explanation as to why I'm drawing those parallels. In the year 2073, a pandemic has altered the global human psyche, eradicating the ability to empathize and creating a society of sociopaths. Amid this chaos, you stand alone, an anomaly with a heart still capable of kindness. This presents a daily struggle as you try to find your way through a world where deceit is common, and others often respond to you with misunderstanding and scorn. At home, you face constant criticism from your parents, who are impatient and angry, quick to chastise any deviation from the standards that govern society, standards that feel unjust to you. At school, your peers ostracize you. Fear of judgment drives you to seek refuge in the library, where books offer a temporary escape. All your efforts to change this morally bankrupt world result in harsh punishment, with your virtues recast as flaws. One time, you attempt to stop theft from school lockers, only to be fingered as a culprit. Experiences like these reinforce the futility of fighting for fairness and justice. To cope, you immerse yourself in solitary pursuits like reading and video games. Avoidance becomes your shield against a world that's all too eager to remind you of your perceived deficiencies. Loneliness is a constant, yet it's a price you pay for staying true to your kind nature. Despite societal pressures, you cannot shed that nature. This harsh reality is a source of shame and internal conflict as you grapple with the paradox of being empathetic in a world that views it as a weakness. The story you have just read is in part inspired by my own experiences, but also representative of the turmoil many neurodivergents, NDs, experience growing up in a world not built for them. From an early age, we are aware of our divergence from social norms, yet unable to explain it. This difference reveals itself through qualities such as deep empathy and a strong sense of justice, traits that, paradoxically, can lead to alienation rather than connection. While we strive to embrace our authentic selves, we learn that doing so can attract derision and make us targets of disdain. Insisting on fairness may also be perceived by others as being overly rigid. In seeking understanding and acceptance, we are met with criticism rather than support. Others rebuke us for our missteps, yet frequently refuse to offer any guidance to amend them. This places us in a perpetual state of confusion, helplessness, and powerlessness. So it might seem like a bit of a stretch for me to cast being neurodivergent and facing oppression or structural ableism in the vein of a dystopian science fiction novel. But to me, having lived through that, I can attest to the reality of those parallels. And if you yourself are autistic or ADHD, or both, you will know this firsthand. So immediately we can see one of the themes here of a group designated as the outsider that's persecuted and marginalized, neurodivergence. Really good science fiction novels are interested in not projecting into the future, but interrogating the present. They apply a magnifying glass to everyday realities to shed a light on injustice, prejudice, inequality, inequity. When I talk about the marginalization of neurodivergent people, I'm talking about a society that prioritizes neurotypicals and their preferences and needs. And an example of this is workplaces. In workplaces that are built to neurotypical norms, they're not sensory friendly. Open plan offices can be very uncomfortable for people who aren't as social, neurodivergent people who have social anxiety, or have sensory sensitivities that are triggered by such close proximity to other people. Hi, Maple. This is Maple. He is my beautiful Sheltie. I'm going to say hi to everybody. Another example of this is oppressive. He wants me to throw the toy. Maple, not now. He's looking at the toy like, come on, you throw the toy? You throw the toy? Another example of this is oppressive practices in education. Schools that require students to sit and conform to a certain standard of behavior, when for neurodivergents, this might be a huge struggle. They might have the need to fidget, to stim, to deal with the sensory overwhelm that comes with being in that environment, but everybody, regardless of their neurotype, is required to conform to that standard. ADHD kids in school are often monitored closely because their behavior is seen as being disruptive to the rest of the class. And while that might be true, the problem isn't so much the student as the environment that doesn't accommodate the student's needs or make any kind of adjustment to make their educational experience easier. Another theme we see in dystopian fiction is the loss of freedom and self-expression. And autistics and ADHDers are often required to mask, camouflage, and compensate for their neurodivergent traits. Otherwise, they're socially excluded, rejected, bullied, punished. In dystopian fiction, we see the dehumanization of the targeted group, and this is common in the use of stereotypes around neurodivergence. The ADHDer is stereotyped as being hyperactive and impulsive, a disruptive presence. This fails to take into account the many diverse neurocognitive profiles that present. Females are often presenting as the inattentive type, but this isn't what's commonly known, and as a result, they don't get picked up and identified early on, and they have to struggle in isolation with all the associated challenges. Another stereotype is the autistic savant. While there are some autistics that might meet this criteria, the vast majority don't, and putting everybody into these very simplified categories is a way to remove their individuality and rob them of their personhood. We see in dystopian stories this marginalized group being targeted and neglected, and that same neglect is present in the medical system in the lack of adequate resources to diagnose, treat, and provide neuroaffirming care to people who are autistic and ADHD. If you've ever tried to get an autism or ADHD diagnosis, you've seen firsthand how difficult that can be because of long waiting lists. This isn't accidental. This is the result of policy that doesn't prioritize neurodivergent needs. Another theme that we see in dystopian fiction is conformity. I know as an autistic person that I can only wear certain kinds of clothes and shoes because they rub me the wrong way. I don't like to wear belts because they make me feel uncomfortable. I prefer to wear special shoes that are a lot more looser and more comfortable. And if I can, I'll have shoes that are lace-free because my motor skills aren't the best. Maybe it's some ADHD impatience, but I don't enjoy having to do buttons or tie shoelaces. It seems like a lot of work for me. In the past, in certain workplaces, dress code mandates that I wear a belt, that I wear certain kinds of shoes. It doesn't take into account my individual needs or the discomfort that results. On the positive side, in dystopian fiction, we often see people rebelling against this oppression. And this has been present in the rise of the neurodiversity movement and the growth of online discourse discussing autism and ADHD, the many challenges associated, and the impact of structural ableism. The information age has made these discussions so much more fruitful, so much more plentiful, and as a result, we have a growing awareness, not just within the neurodivergent community, but without as well, of what it's like to be neurodivergent, the challenges we face, and the systems and structures we need to modify to make it more accommodating for others. We've seen neurodivergent people come together online to find empowerment, shared understanding, empathy, community, and this is often extended into real life as well. Why am I making this comparison? Well, neurotypicals, I think for the most part, are oblivious of the alternate life that's lived by people who are in marginalized groups, like neurodivergents. They live a life of privilege and advantage that is conveyed to them automatically. They never have to question things because it's automatically given to them. For those of us who haven't had that privilege and advantage and have had to find their own way through life, navigating multiple challenges as a result of structural ableism, we face a substantially greater challenge just getting by on a day-to-day basis. When I reflect on my own love of dystopian fiction, I think about stories of rebellions, injustices, resource shortages, social inequality, and it's hard not to see those parallels. It's hard not to realize I've been living that myself. I've been conditioned not to look at it that critically. I've been conditioned to accept it as a given, to silence myself, to not speak out about the challenges I'm facing, to not complain, because then I'm going to be seen as a victim. Whether I'm seeing that internally or other people are projecting that onto me and criticizing me for speaking out, and that has happened. But if we look a little deeper at our everyday lived reality, we can see the insidious influence of structural ableism on all facets of our lives. For me, coming into my neurodivergent identity meant awakening to this fact, that I was living under structural ableism, that I was being oppressed. All my life, I felt like I've had to punch above my weight, that I've had to overcompensate, that I've had to ignore and disregard my own needs because society ordained that my needs weren't important, that they weren't a priority, that I was asking for special treatment that I didn't deserve, that me wanting that support was me being a burden to society. And this brings me to another important issue, which is internalized shame. Internalized shame really just is internalized ableism. Growing up in this real-life dystopia, we've been brainwashed to see our own needs as too much. For so many years, I kept quiet because I didn't want to rock the boat, because I felt like if I spoke up, I would be knocked down. Kind of like George Orwell's novel 1984, where everybody's living under this propagandist government that pushes one narrative and expects everybody to just lap it up while they suppress their own individual wills, their intuition, their instincts, their critical judgment, so they can fall in line with the party. I fell in line with the party because that was what I was raised and taught to do. It never occurred to me to ask hard questions or to push back or to speak up. It's when we do these things, though, that change happens, that people begin to second guess their privilege and advantage, that neurotypicals revise their narratives to include us and to accommodate our needs. Recently, for the first time ever, I asked for an accommodation. One of my classrooms at school had a very noisy AC unit, and because the lecturer was very quiet, I couldn't hear half of what he was saying, so I was struggling to follow along. I went to the school's disability department and I explained my situation. They offered to set him up with a mic, the professor, so I could hear him better. That didn't work out, so they offered me instead to move from that classroom to another one without a noisy AC unit. When I received that offer, the first thing I thought was, oh, no, don't inconvenience everybody else by moving class. I don't want to be that person who asks for an accommodation at everybody else's expense. They conveyed to me that it was not an issue, and when I reflected on it, I wasn't the only person who was struggling to hear in that class. That AC unit was so loud that other people had repeatedly complained, and the lecturer had kind of thrown his hands up and said, I can't do anything about it. It was not until I went outside the box and I spoke up and explained my circumstance that somebody came in and thought laterally and came up with a solution to the problem. If I'd stayed quiet, that problem would not be resolved and the situation would not have changed. So when I spoke up for myself, I was speaking up for other people as well. My classmates, whether they were neurotypical or neurodivergent, had also experienced the same problem as me. And this is the beauty of self-advocacy, because when you advocate for one, you're advocating for all. The more we as individuals speak up, the greater the chance we'll be heard and that the changes we need to succeed will happen. Little by little, we are chipping away at the foundations of this dystopia, and when it crumbles, we will build in its place a more equitable world. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel and share it with anyone you think might benefit from watching it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now. Wave goodbye. Wave goodbye. Wave.